For almost 15 years, a dentist walked across the exact same floor every single day. He cleaned teeth. He greeted patients. He locked up at night. And not once, not one single time, did he ever suspect what was lying 6 inches beneath his shoes. It had been there since 1901, waiting in the dark, sealed away and perfectly preserved. And when it was finally uncovered, it rewrote everything anyone thought they knew about the building at 68 Milton Avenue. This is that story. The village of Ballston Spa sits in Saratoga County, New York. It's a quiet community, deep roots, old architecture, and the kind of Main Street charm that makes you feel like you've stepped backward in time. At 68 Milton Avenue, there stood a modest 2-story commercial building. Honestly, it was the kind of building you'd drive past 100 times and never notice. Brick, old windows, a small dental practice operating on the ground floor. That practice belonged to Dr. James Hansen. James had been working out of the first floor since the late 1990s. The building's second story loomed above him, mostly forgotten. It was used as overflow storage by previous owners, and otherwise, ignored. Nobody went up there. It was just dead space, dust and shadows. That changed in 2011. James and his wife, Sue, made the decision to purchase the entire building outright. They figured, why keep renting when they could own? It was a practical move. Smart. But what that piece of paper set into motion was something neither of them could have ever predicted. For 3 years, the upper level remained what it had always been, an afterthought. Then, in 2014, Sue had an idea. What if they converted that wasted space into a luxury apartment? The bones of the building were solid. It could be beautiful. She had no idea how much history she was about to unearth. Contractors moved in. Demolition began. Walls came down. And then, one afternoon, as a worker slammed his crowbar down to pull up the aged hardwood flooring, he stopped mid-swing. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was different. Beneath the top layer of planking, there was a second floor. But this wasn't subflooring. It wasn't structural support. It was a fully finished, deliberately installed surface made of beautiful wooden panels. Alternating strips of light and dark timber laid out in precise, parallel lines that stretched the absolute full length of the room. The contractor stood there in the dust, staring at it. He'd seen a pattern like this before. At first, it didn't make sense. Why would someone install a pristine hardwood surface only to bury it under a cheap subfloor? The contractor kept pulling up boards. More of the pattern revealed itself. Long, narrow, perfectly symmetrical. And then, the realization hit him. It looked exactly like a bowling alley. He called Sue upstairs. Imagine being Sue in this moment. You crouch down in what used to be a creepy, empty storage room. You run your hand across the old timber, feeling the smooth, worn grain of wood that hasn't seen the light of day in almost a century. They kept pulling up boards, and at the far end of the room, they found the proof. The crew uncovered 10 small metal discs embedded in the floor, arranged in a perfect triangle. Beneath each disc sat a small, spring-loaded peg connected to a mechanical foot pedal nearby. Sue stared at the formation for a long moment, and then it clicked. The discs were pin stations. The pegs popped up to hold bowling pins in place. The foot pedal reset them after every frame. This wasn't just a floor that looked like a bowling alley. It was a bowling alley. A full, mechanical, operational setup, sealed like a time capsule beneath the floorboards of a building where a man had been filling cavities for 15 years. To be specific, it was a candlepin bowling alley, a fast-paced, finesse-driven variation of the sport hugely popular in the Northeast over 100 years ago. The pins are tall and skinny. The balls fit in the palm of your hand. But what made this discovery so mind-blowing wasn't just the lanes themselves, it was the condition. Because they had been entombed in total darkness, sealed away from moisture and foot traffic, the wood was practically flawless. Sue pressed her foot onto the heavy iron pedal, and the small pegs rose through the metal discs exactly as they had over 100 years ago. A machine built in the early 1900s, buried for generations, and it still worked. But that brought up a massive question. Who put it there? And why on earth was it buried? Sue dove into the town's historical archives, and the story she found was straight out of a movie. It starts with a massive fire in 1901 that burned the original property to ash. The lot sat empty until a man named Herbert B. Massey stepped in. Herbert rebuilt the property, and he had a vision: a tavern on the first floor and a high-end bowling alley on the second. Decades before anyone coined the term, Herbert had basically built a 1900s Dave and Buster's. And Herbert was a total character. He was ambitious, colorful, and constantly dancing on the wrong side of the law. He had his liquor license yanked for selling booze on Sundays. He hosted illegal gambling, cards, dice, bets, whatever kept the patrons spending. But here's the twist. According to local records, he was also a massive neat freak, obsessively organized. He was a gambler and a germaphobe, a rule breaker with a ruler. Herbert ran a notoriously tight ship, even while the ship was doing highly illegal things. Eventually, Herbert's era ended. The tavern closed. The bowling lanes went silent. And at some point, someone simply laid cheap flooring right over the top of the lanes, hiding them in the dark. No one preserved them on purpose. They were just left behind. Over the next century, that building served as a Boy Scout office, a law firm, and eventually James's dental practice. Think about the irony of that. For nearly 100 years, people sat in dentist chairs, getting their teeth cleaned, totally unaware that just inches above their heads was a perfectly preserved relic of a forgotten era. A place where locals drank Herbert Massey's illegal whiskey and placed bets they probably shouldn't have. All of it, hidden in plain sight. So, what do you do when you find a century-old bowling alley inside your walls? If you're Sue Hansen, you don't rip it out. You don't cover it back up. You make it the centerpiece. When the luxury apartment was finished, Sue preserved one of the original candlepin lanes and incorporated it directly into the floor plan. It now sits right in the kitchen. Imagine waking up, pouring your morning coffee over a sleek granite counter, while standing on the exact spot where a 1920s hustler hurled a wooden ball toward a set of pins. It's not a replica, it's the original wood, the original pin stations, the original foot pedal, a piece of 1901 living and breathing inside a 21st century home. Old and new, not fighting each other, but completing each other. When Dr. James Hansen walked into that building in the 1990s, he was just looking for an office. When they tore up the floor in 2014, they were just renovating. But that's the beautiful, eerie thing about old buildings. They hold on to their secrets with incredible patience. They don't advertise what they're hiding. They just wait, year after year, decade after decade, waiting for someone curious enough to look beneath the surface. James and Sue walked over a hidden world for 15 years without knowing it. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's underneath your floor? If this story made you look at your ceiling or your floorboards just a little bit differently today, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you love stories about the hidden history all around us, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.